The crystalline spires of the Zeltharian capital gleamed under the twin suns, their surfaces reflecting the perpetual aurora that danced across the planet's magnetosphere. Princess Lyralii stood at the observation deck of the highest tower, her forearms gracefully positioned behind her back as she watched the military formations below. The Zeltharian Imperial Guard moved in perfect synchronization, their chitinous armor catching the light as they practiced ancient combat forms that had remained unchanged for millennia. "Your Highness," came the melodic voice of Commander Thexani, her military advisor. The tall, insectoid being approached with measured steps, his mandibles clicking in the rhythm that indicated formal address. "The War Council awaits your presence." Lyralii turned from the window, her translucent skin shifting from the peaceful blue of contemplation to the determined purple of resolve. At barely 2 centuries old, she was young by Zeltharian standards, but the weight of impending war had aged her beyond her years. The delicate patterns that marked her royal lineage pulsed with a faint golden light beneath her skin. "Has there been any word from the Outer Rim?" she asked, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that marked her as nobility. Thexani's antennae drooped slightly. "The Krogar advance continues unopposed, Your Highness. 3 more systems have fallen in the past solar cycle. Their berserker fleets show no signs of slowing." The Krogar Empire had been expanding aggressively across the galactic arm for decades, consuming worlds and enslaving populations with methodical efficiency. Their military philosophy was simple: overwhelming force applied without mercy. Entire civilizations had been reduced to rubble before their relentless advance. Lyralii moved through the corridors of the palace, her silk robes rustling softly against the polished stone floor. Servants and courtiers bowed as she passed, but she barely acknowledged them. Her mind was focused on the reports she had been receiving from the front lines. The Zeltharian military, despite their technological superiority and tactical brilliance, was being slowly ground down by the sheer brutality of Krogar warfare. The War Council chamber was a vast circular room with a holographic display at its center. Around the room sat the greatest military minds of the Zeltharian Empire, generals who had won countless battles, admirals who commanded fleets numbering in the thousands, and strategists whose tactical brilliance was legendary throughout the galaxy. "Your Highness," General Vextor rose from his seat, his scarred carapace bearing witness to decades of combat. "We have completed our analysis of the latest Krogar offensive patterns." The holographic display shimmered to life, showing the spiral arm of the galaxy with red markers indicating Krogar-controlled territory. The crimson stain was spreading inexorably toward Zeltharian space, consuming everything in its path. "Their advance has accelerated," Admiral Zenkala reported, her multiple eyes reflecting the light of the display. "Intelligence suggests they have developed new weapons technology. Our fleet engagements are resulting in increasingly unfavorable casualty ratios." Lyralii studied the tactical displays with growing unease. The Krogar military machine seemed unstoppable. Their ships were crude but effective, their warriors savage but disciplined. Most troubling of all, they seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to adapt to any defensive strategy the Zeltharians employed. "What of our allies?" she asked. "Surely the Confederated Worlds will not stand idle while the Krogar threaten the entire sector." General Vextor's mandibles clicked in what passed for a bitter laugh among his species. "The Etherian Council debates endlessly but takes no action. The Crystalline Collective has withdrawn into their border worlds, claiming neutrality. The aquatic leagues are too distant to provide meaningful assistance." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Zeltharian Empire, despite its long history of peaceful expansion and diplomatic success, would face the Krogar threat alone. "There is one possibility," spoke a voice from the shadows at the edge of the chamber. All heads turned as Elder Mordain stepped into the light. The ancient Zeltharian was old beyond measure, his skin bearing the deep silver coloration that marked those who had lived for millennia. His presence in the War Council was unprecedented. "Elder," Lyralii said, rising from her seat in respect. "We are honored by your presence." Mordain moved slowly to the center of the chamber, leaning heavily on a staff carved from the heartwood of their homeworld's sacred trees. "In my long years, I have witnessed the rise and fall of many civilizations. I have seen species that seemed invincible brought low by their own hubris, and others that appeared weak emerge victorious through cunning and determination. He gestured to the holographic display, which shifted to show a small, blue-green world in a distant spiral arm. There is a species that has recently emerged on the galactic stage. They call themselves humans. Murmurs rippled through the assembled officers. The human species was known to most galactic civilizations, but they were generally regarded as primitive newcomers with little to offer the established powers. Elder, General Vextor said carefully, with all respect, the humans possess neither advanced technology nor significant military forces. How could they possibly assist us against the Krogar? Mordane's ancient eyes gleamed with an inner light. You speak of technology and numbers, General. These are important, yes, but they are not everything. The humans possess something that we have perhaps forgotten in our millennia of civilization. And what is that, Elder? Lyralii asked. They possess the fire of youth and the fury of the desperate. They have known war throughout their entire recorded history. While we have built gardens and composed symphonies, they have perfected the art of violence. They are not bound by the conventions that limit our military thinking. The chamber erupted in protests and objections. The idea that a primitive species could succeed where the mighty Zeltharian Empire was struggling seemed absurd to the assembled military leadership. You speak of mercenaries. Admiral Zenkala said, her voice sharp with disapproval. The Zeltharian Empire does not hire alien warriors to fight our battles. No, Mordane replied quietly, his voice cutting through the protests. I speak of allies. I speak of a species that has never known defeat because they refuse to accept it. I speak of beings who see impossible odds not as reasons to surrender, but as challenges to overcome. Lyralii held up her hands for silence. What do you propose, Elder? Send an envoy to the human homeworld. Offer them alliance against the Krogar. Promise them worlds to colonize, technology to advance their civilization, a place among the galactic powers. In return, ask for their unique perspective on warfare and their willingness to fight for freedom. And if they refuse? General Vextor asked. Mordane smiled, an expression that looked strange on his ancient features. General, have you ever studied human history? They have never refused a fight they believed was righteous. The question is not whether they will help us. The question is whether we are prepared for the methods they will employ. The debate continued for hours, but, gradually, the wisdom of the Elder's proposal became apparent. The Zeltharian military was losing a war of attrition against an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each victory. Conventional tactics had proven insufficient. Perhaps it was time to try something unconventional. Very well, Lyralii finally said. I will authorize a diplomatic mission to the human homeworld. But, who will serve as our envoy? This mission will require someone capable of understanding and communicating with an alien mindset. I volunteer, Your Highness, said a voice from the back of the chamber. All heads turned to see Ambassador Keelanth step forward. The diplomatic corps representative was younger than most of the military officers but had earned a reputation for her ability to navigate complex interspecies negotiations. Ambassador, Lyralii said, are you certain? The humans are reportedly a violent and unpredictable species. The mission could be dangerous. Keelantha's skin shifted to the confident gold of determination. Your Highness, if the Elder is correct about human nature, then they will respect directness and courage. If I approach them with fear and uncertainty, they will sense it immediately. If I go to them as an equal, seeking alliance rather than begging for assistance, we may have a chance. The decision was made. Within hours, the fastest ship in the Zeltharian fleet was prepared for departure. Ambassador Keelanth would carry with her detailed intelligence about the Krogar threat, offers of technological exchange, and the desperate hope of an empire on the brink of annihilation. As the ship prepared to depart from the orbital station above the capital world, Lyralii met privately with the ambassador in the diplomatic quarters. Keelanth, she said, her voice carrying the weight of her fears, if the humans agree to help us, what kind of ally will we be welcoming? Elder Mordane spoke of their violent nature as an asset, but what if we cannot control them once they are unleashed? The ambassador considered the question carefully. Your Highness, from what I have learned about human history, they are indeed a violent species. But their violence is not mindless. They fight fiercely for their principles, for their loved ones, for their freedom. If we can convince them that our cause is just, I believe they will prove to be the most loyal allies we could hope for. And if we cannot convince them? Then, we will face the Krogar alone, as we planned. But, if we can. Your Highness, I have read the reports of human military engagements. They do not simply win battles. They rewrite the rules of warfare. They turn defeats into victories and make the impossible seem routine. As the ship engaged its hyperdrive and disappeared into the void between stars, Lyralii remained at the observation window long after it had vanished from sight. The twin suns were setting behind the crystalline spires of her capital, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. Somewhere across the galaxy, the Krogar fleets continued their inexorable advance, consuming worlds and enslaving populations with mechanical efficiency. But, for the first time in months, the princess of the Zeltharian Empire allowed herself to feel a small spark of hope. Perhaps Elder Mordain was right. Perhaps there was more than one way to fight a war. And, perhaps, somewhere among the stars, there existed a species crazy enough to stand against impossible odds and emerge victorious. The fate of the Zeltharian Empire now rested in the hands of creatures they had never met, from a world they barely knew existed. Ambassador Keelenth would need to find a way to convince a species of warriors to fight for a cause that was not their own, against an enemy they had never faced, for allies they had never met. As night fell over the capital, Princess Lyralii whispered a prayer to the ancient spirits of her people. If the humans were truly as formidable as Elder Mordain believed, then, perhaps there was still hope for freedom in the galaxy. But, if they were not, then, the crystalline spires of Zeltharia might soon fall silent forever, another monument to the inexorable expansion of the Krogar Empire. The die had been cast. Now all that remained was to wait and see what manner of allies the humans would prove to be. In the depths of space, Ambassador Keelenth's ship continued its journey toward the small blue world that might hold the key to salvation. Behind her, the Zeltharian Empire prepared for war. Ahead of her lay the unknown potential of humanity. The galaxy held its breath and waited to see which force would prove stronger, the mechanical brutality of the Krogar war machine, or the unpredictable fury of human determination. Neither the princess nor her ambassador could have imagined what they were about to unleash upon the stars. The blue marble of Earth hung in the void like a jewel, its surface swirled with white clouds and the deep azure of vast oceans. Ambassador Keelenth watched through the viewport of her ship as they approached the human homeworld, her skin shifting nervously between shades of green uncertainty and blue anxiety. The planet appeared deceptively peaceful from orbit, showing no signs of the violent species that Elder Mordain had described. Ambassador, her aide, Technician Veltar, announced from the communications console, "We are receiving multiple scanning beams from the planet's surface and orbital installations. The humans appear to have detected our approach." Keelenth straightened her diplomatic robes and moved to the communication array. "Open a channel on all frequencies. Use standard galactic diplomatic protocols." The main screen flickered to life, displaying the image of a human male in what appeared to be a military uniform. The creature was smaller than most galactic species, with only 2 arms and primitive-looking features, but there was something in its eyes that made Keelenth pause. The human's gaze was sharp, calculating, and completely unafraid despite facing an alien contact for what was presumably the first time. "Unknown vessel," the human spoke in a crisp, authoritative tone, "you are in violation of Earth's sovereign airspace. Identify yourself and state your intentions, or you will be considered hostile." Keelenth was taken aback by the directness of the communication. Most species would have begun with elaborate greetings and ceremonial exchanges. These humans seemed to care little for diplomatic niceties. "Greetings, human representative," Keelenth replied, her voice modulator translating her harmonic speech into the human language. "I am Ambassador Keelenth of the Zeltharian Empire. I come seeking audience with your leadership regarding a matter of mutual interest and galactic importance." The human's expression remained unchanged. "Stand by for escort to Lunar Station Delta 7. Any deviation from prescribed course will result in immediate defensive action. Do you understand these terms?" Yes, I understand, Keelenth stammered, surprised by the human's matter-of-fact tone regarding potential violence. As her ship was guided toward the moon by human escort vessels, Keelenth studied the tactical displays with growing amazement. The human fleet was primitive by galactic standards, their ships utilizing crude chemical and nuclear propulsion systems. Yet their formations were precise, their coordination flawless, and their weapon systems, while technologically inferior, were positioned for maximum effectiveness. Fascinating, Veltar observed, reviewing the sensor data. Their technology is centuries behind galactic standards, yet their tactical deployment suggests a level of military sophistication that rivals our own. The lunar station was an impressive structure of metal and composite materials, clearly built for both defense and diplomacy. As Keelenth's ship docked, she noticed the subtle weapons emplacements and the strategic positioning of defensive systems. These humans, despite their technological limitations, understood the art of war. The airlock opened to reveal two human escorts. One was female, tall and athletic with short dark hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her uniform bore insignia that Keelenth's cultural database identified as indicating high military rank. The other was male, older, with graying hair and the weathered appearance of someone who had seen combat. Ambassador Keelenth, the female human said, stepping forward with a confident stride, "I am General Sarah Chen, United Earth Defense Command. This is Colonel Marcus Rodriguez, our intelligence liaison. We understand you wish to speak with our leadership." General Chen, Keelenth replied, noting how the human's title suggested a culture that valued military prowess. "I bring urgent news that affects not only our respective civilizations but the freedom of all species in this galactic sector." "Then, you'd better come with us," Chen said, turning and walking briskly down the corridor. "The Council is eager to hear what brings the first official alien ambassador to our doorstep." As they walked through the station, Keelenth observed the human military personnel with growing interest. Unlike the ceremonial guards of most civilized species, these soldiers moved with purposeful efficiency. Their equipment was maintained to perfection, their bearing suggested constant readiness for combat, and, most unnervingly, they all carried weapons even in what was clearly a diplomatic facility. "General," Keelenth ventured, "may I ask why your personnel are armed in a diplomatic setting?" Chen glanced back with what might have been amusement. "Ambassador, we've been fighting wars since before we discovered fire. We've learned that the best time to prepare for violence is when everything seems peaceful." The conference chamber was a stark, functional room dominated by a large table surrounded by chairs designed for human physiology. Around the table sat the most powerful leaders of the human species, presidents, prime ministers, generals, and admirals representing the various nation-states that had somehow managed to unite under the banner of Earth Defense Command. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Chen announced, "Ambassador Keelenth of the Zeltharian Empire." Keelenth stepped forward, her diplomatic training taking over despite her nervousness. "Honored leaders of humanity, I come to you in desperate circumstances. My people face an enemy that threatens not only our civilization but the freedom of all intelligent life in this sector of the galaxy." An elderly human with white hair and sharp features leaned forward. "I am Secretary General Harrison of the United Earth Council. Please, Ambassador, tell us about this threat." Keelenth activated a holographic projector, filling the center of the table with a three-dimensional map of the galactic arm. Red indicators marked the advancing Krogar Empire, their conquest expanding like a disease across the star systems. "The Krogar Empire," she began, "has been expanding across the galaxy for decades. They are a militaristic species that views all other life as either resources to be exploited or obstacles to be eliminated. They have conquered 17 civilizations in the past 50 standard years." A woman in a military uniform raised her hand. "Admiral Peterson, Earth Naval Command. What makes these Krogar so dangerous? Surely civilizations with superior technology should be able to resist them." Keelenth's skin shifted to the dark purple of deep concern. "The Krogar do not rely solely on technology, Admiral. They are natural warriors, bred for conquest over millions of years of evolution. Their strategy is simple: overwhelming force applied without mercy. They do not take prisoners. They do not negotiate. They consume entire worlds, enslaving those populations they find useful and exterminating the rest. And they're heading in your direction, observed a man with the bearing of a career military officer. Not just our direction, General, Keelenth replied. Our analysis indicates that once they have consolidated their hold on our sector, they will continue expanding. Eventually, they will reach this region of the galaxy. Humanity will face the same choice we face now: submit or die. The room fell silent as the humans absorbed this information. Finally, Secretary General Harrison spoke. What do you want from us, Ambassador? Our species has only recently achieved interstellar flight. We have no fleets capable of crossing galactic distances, no weapons that could threaten an empire spanning multiple star systems. Keelenth had prepared for this question during the long journey to Earth. Secretary General, we do not seek your fleets or your weapons. We seek your expertise. Our expertise? Admiral Peterson asked with obvious skepticism. In what field could a species that has barely left its home system possibly instruct galactic civilizations? Warfare, Keelenth said simply. The silence that followed was different from before. Where there had been confusion, now there was intense attention. Every human in the room was focused on her words with laser-like concentration. Ambassador, General Chen said slowly, explain what you mean. Keelenth took a breath, knowing that her next words would determine the fate of both their species. General, the Zeltharian Empire has existed peacefully for over 10,000 of your years. We have explored the galaxy, made contact with hundreds of species, built magnificent cities, and created works of art that span solar systems. We are proud of our civilization. But, prompted Colonel Rodriguez. But, we have forgotten how to fight, Keelenth admitted. Our military exists primarily for ceremony and defense against pirates or raiders. We have not faced a true enemy in millennia. The other galactic civilizations are much the same. We have grown soft, comfortable, unwilling to make the hard choices that war demands. She gestured toward the humans around the table. Humanity, by contrast, has never known true peace. You have been at war for your entire recorded history. You have fought with sticks and stones, with swords and shields, with guns and bombs, with nuclear weapons that could destroy your own world. You have never had the luxury of forgetting that survival requires strength. Secretary General Harrison leaned back in his chair. You want us to teach you how to fight. More than that, Keelenth said. We want to learn how you think. How you approach problems that seem impossible to solve. How you turn disadvantages into advantages. How you win against superior forces. And, in return, asked a woman whose insignia identified her as the head of the European Federation. In return, we offer you full partnership in the galactic community. Access to technologies that could advance your civilization by centuries. Worlds for your expanding population to colonize. And, the knowledge that you have helped preserve freedom across the galaxy. The debate that followed was unlike anything Keelenth had witnessed in diplomatic circles. The humans argued with passion but, without personal animosity. They challenged each other's ideas fiercely but, remained focused on the central question: could they afford to ignore a threat that would eventually reach Earth? The question isn't whether we can help you, General Chen finally said. The question is whether we should. Getting involved in a galactic war could bring destruction down on our own world. General, Keelenth replied, the Krogar expansion is inevitable. They will not stop until they control everything. The only choice is whether you face them as part of a galactic alliance or alone, after they have conquered everyone else. An older man who had been silent throughout the discussion finally spoke. I am General Hawkins, Supreme Allied Commander. Ambassador, you spoke of learning how we think, how we approach impossible problems. Are you prepared for what that actually means? I believe so, General. Hawkins smiled grimly. Human warfare isn't just about tactics and strategy, Ambassador. It's about making choices that other species would consider unthinkable. It's about accepting casualties that would horrify civilized beings. It's about using methods that go beyond conventional military doctrine.
We are prepared to do whatever is necessary, Keelanth said, though she felt a chill of uncertainty. Are you? Admiral Peterson asked.
Because if we agree to help you, we won't be sending advisors or trainers. We'll be sending humans who have been bred for war since the dawn of time.
We'll be unleashing something on your enemy that they have never faced before.
Secretary General Harrison stood slowly, his decision made.
Ambassador, we will help you. But, understand this, we fight to win, by any means necessary. Once we commit to this war, we will not stop until your enemy is defeated or we are dead.
There will be no half measures, no negotiated settlements, no mercy for those who threaten the freedom of innocent beings. Keelanth felt her skin shift to the gold of triumph mixed with the silver of apprehension.
I understand, Secretary General. When can your forces be ready to depart? Forces?
General Chen laughed, but there was no humor in the sound.
Ambassador, we're not sending forces. We're sending one man. One human? Keelanth stammered. But, surely against an entire empire. You don't understand yet, Colonel Rodriguez said quietly. You asked us to teach you how to think like humans. One human warrior, thinking like a human, can change the course of a war. Wait until you meet him.
As the meeting concluded and preparations began for humanity's entry into galactic affairs, Keelanth found herself wondering what she had set in motion. The humans had agreed to help, but their casual references to unthinkable methods and a single warrior sent to face an empire left her more confused than ever.
What kind of ally had she found? And, more importantly, what kind of warrior could a single human be?
The answers to those questions would soon reshape the galaxy in ways that none of them could imagine.
The transport ship that carried Ambassador Keelanth back to Zeltharian space was unlike any vessel she had ever seen.
While maintaining the basic configuration of her original diplomatic craft, human engineers had modified nearly every system during the brief layover at Earth's lunar station. The changes were subtle but telling: improved defensive systems, enhanced sensor arrays, and, most notably, weapons that seemed far too advanced for the human's supposed technological level. Ambassador, Veltar observed from his station, the human modifications appear to violate several principles of known physics.
Their energy conversion efficiency exceeds theoretical maximums. Keelanth studied the technical readouts with growing amazement.
The humans claimed their technology was primitive compared to galactic standards.
How is this possible?
Her answer came from an unexpected source. A voice with a distinctly human accent spoke from the ship's communication system.
Because we've had to make do with less for our entire history, Ambassador.
When you don't have fancy materials or unlimited energy, you learn to be creative. Keelanth spun toward the source of the voice, her skin flushing with embarrassment at being overheard.
Who is speaking? The name's Jack Morrison, Ambassador. I'm your passenger for this trip.
The voice paused, then added with what sounded like amusement, "Don't worry about privacy protocols.
I'm not eavesdropping intentionally.
These human modifications tie into all the ship's systems for tactical awareness."
You are the warrior they mentioned? Keelanth asked, trying to reconcile the casual voice with the dire warnings the human leadership had given. I'm a soldier, Ambassador. Whether that makes me a warrior is something your enemies will have to decide. As they traveled through hyperspace toward Zeltharian territory, Keelanth found herself increasingly curious about her human passenger.
The man had boarded at the lunar station without ceremony, carrying only a single equipment case and wearing what appeared to be a simple military uniform. He was unremarkable by human standards: average height, brown hair, weathered features that suggested experience rather than youth. Yet something about him made Keelanth deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't anything he said or did. It was the way he moved, the way he observed everything around him, the way he seemed to assess every person and situation for potential threats or opportunities. Even at rest, he radiated a sense of coiled energy, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike.
Mr. Morrison, she finally asked as they entered the outer reaches of the Zeltharian system, may I ask about your background? The human leaders spoke of you with unusual respect.
There was a long pause before he answered. I've been a soldier for most of my life, Ambassador.
I've served in conflicts on 6 continents back on Earth. I've done special operations work for various governments. I've studied warfare the way some people study art or music. But surely one individual, regardless of experience, cannot hope to affect the outcome of an interstellar war? Another pause, longer this time. Ambassador, has your species ever had a concept similar to what we call asymmetric warfare? I am not familiar with that term. It's the idea that a smaller, weaker force can defeat a larger, stronger one by changing the rules of engagement. By fighting in ways the enemy doesn't expect, using tactics they're not prepared for, exploiting weaknesses they don't know they have. As they approached the capital world, Keelanth received urgent communications from the palace. The Krogar advance had accelerated during her absence. 2 more border systems had fallen, and refugee fleets were streaming toward the inner worlds carrying tales of unprecedented brutality. It appears time is shorter than we hoped, she told Morrison as they prepared to dock with the orbital station. Time's always shorter than you hope in war, he replied. That's why you have to make every moment count. The reception at the palace was formal but hurried. Princess Lyralii received them in the War Council chamber, surrounded by her military advisors and the ever-present Elder Mordain. The holographic displays showed the latest tactical situation, Krogar fleets massing at the edge of the next system, preparing for what intelligence suggested would be a major assault on the Zeltharian core worlds. Ambassador Keelanth, Princess Lyralii said, rising from her seat, we are grateful for your successful mission. I trust the humans have agreed to provide the assistance we desperately need? Your Highness, may I present Jack Morrison of Earth. He represents humanity's contribution to our defense. The silence that followed was deafening. Every being in the chamber stared at the unremarkable human who stood quietly beside the ambassador, his hands clasped behind his back in a relaxed military posture. General Vextor's mandibles clicked in what might have been confusion or incredulity. Ambassador, surely there has been some misunderstanding. Where are the human fleets? The battle squadrons? The armies we were promised? General, Morrison said, speaking for the first time since entering the chamber, I am what humanity is sending. One human? Admiral Zenkala's multiple eyes focused on Morrison with obvious disbelief. Against an empire that commands millions of warriors? Morrison's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes hardened. Admiral, before you dismiss what one human can accomplish, you might want to ask Ambassador Keelanth what happened to your ship's defensive systems during our journey here. All heads turned to the ambassador, who was suddenly reluctant to speak. The human made modifications to our defensive capabilities. Minor adjustments to improve efficiency. Show them, Morrison said simply. Keelanth reluctantly activated a holographic display showing the technical specifications of her ship's weapons systems. The assembled military leaders stared in shock at energy output readings that exceeded anything in the Zeltharian arsenal. How is this possible? General Vextor demanded. Morrison stepped forward to examine the tactical displays showing the Krogar advance. Because you've been thinking about warfare the same way for thousands of years. You build bigger ships, more powerful weapons, more sophisticated defenses. You fight the way your enemies expect you to fight. He gestured to the holographic battle formations. Look at these Krogar attack patterns. Massive frontal assaults, overwhelming firepower, brute force tactics. They win because they're willing to accept casualties that other species consider unacceptable. And, you propose a different approach? Princess Lyralii asked. Morrison's smile was predatory. Your Highness, the Krogar have never faced humans before. They have no idea what we're capable of. They've conquered 17 civilizations using the same basic strategy because no one has ever forced them to adapt. What do you suggest? Elder Mordain asked, his ancient voice carrying a note of curiosity. I suggest we give them a war they're not prepared for. Morrison moved to the holographic display, his hands manipulating the controls with surprising familiarity. The Krogar Empire is built on the principle of overwhelming force. But every strength can become a weakness if you know how to exploit it. The display shifted to show the Krogar supply lines stretching back through conquered territory.
Morrison highlighted key points along the routes: fuel depots, ammunition stockpiles, command centers, communication relays. They move fast and hit hard, but that requires enormous logistical support. Cut those supply lines, and their advance stalls. Force them to defend their conquered territory, and they lose their numerical advantage.
Admiral Zenkala studied the display with growing interest. A campaign of raids against their rear areas?
We have considered such tactics, but our forces are needed to defend against their primary advance.
You don't need large forces for what I'm proposing, Morrison said.
You need small units that can move fast, strike hard, and disappear before the enemy can respond. You need soldiers willing to operate behind enemy lines with no support and no hope of rescue if things go wrong. Suicide missions, General Vextor observed grimly.
High-risk operations, Morrison corrected. There's a difference.
Suicide missions accomplish nothing except getting your people killed.
High-risk operations with proper planning and execution can change the course of a war.
Princess Lyralii leaned forward in her chair.
Mr. Morrison, are you proposing to lead such operations yourself? I'm proposing to train your people to think and fight like humans.
But, yes, I'll lead the first few missions until your troops understand the concept.
Impossible, Admiral Zenkala declared. We cannot risk alien lives on uncertain tactics proposed by a single individual from a species we barely know.
Morrison's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a note of steel.
Admiral, with respect, you've been losing this war using conventional tactics.
Your enemy has conquered 17 civilizations because they're better at conventional warfare than anyone else.
If you want to keep fighting the way you have been, you'll get the same results you've been getting.
The debate that followed was heated but brief. The military situation was deteriorating rapidly, and conventional defenses had proven inadequate against Krogar assault tactics.
Finally, Princess Lyralii called for silence.
Mr. Morrison, she said, you speak confidently of tactics and strategies, but war is more than theory.
Have you personally commanded troops in combat?
Morrison met her gaze directly. Your Highness, I've led special operations teams in some of the most dangerous conflicts in human history. I've fought in urban warfare, jungle campaigns, desert operations, and Arctic conditions. I've commanded units ranging in size from 4-person reconnaissance teams to brigade-level assault forces.
Against what kind of enemies? Other humans, mostly.
Which means I've fought against the most dangerous predators in Earth's history.
Every conflict taught me something new about survival, about adaptation, about finding ways to win when the odds are against you.
Elder Mordain spoke into the silence that followed. Your Highness, I believe we should give this human the opportunity to prove his methods.
What have we to lose that we are not already losing?
The decision was made with the reluctant agreement of the military command. Morrison would be given a small force of volunteers and the freedom to conduct operations against Krogar rear areas.
If his tactics proved effective, they would be expanded. If not, the Zeltharian Empire would continue its conventional defense until the inevitable end.
As the council dispersed to make preparations, Princess Lyralii approached Morrison privately. Human, she said, you spoke of making the enemy face a war they are not prepared for.
What exactly do you intend to do? Morrison's smile was cold and calculating.
Your Highness, the Krogar think they understand warfare because they've always won through superior force. They've never faced an enemy that refused to fight by their rules.
They're about to learn what humans mean by total war.
As he walked away to begin training his new unit, Princess Lyralii felt a chill that had nothing to do with the palace's climate control. For the first time since the war began, she was beginning to understand what Elder Mordain had meant about the dangerous nature of human allies. The galaxy was about to witness something it had never seen before: human military doctrine applied to interstellar warfare.
The results would be unlike anything in recorded galactic history.
The Krogar Empire was about to discover that conquering civilized species was very different from fighting humans. The training facility on Zeltharia's third moon had been hastily converted from a mining complex into something resembling a human military base. Jack Morrison stood in the center of what had once been a ore processing chamber, watching 50 Zeltharian volunteers attempt to master concepts that went against everything their civilized upbringing had taught them. "Move faster," he barked as a squad attempted to navigate an obstacle course designed to simulate combat conditions.
"The enemy isn't going to wait for you to politely ask permission to advance."
Lieutenant Cathvar, a young officer from the Zeltharian Special Forces, stumbled through a simulated breach and clear exercise, his forearms tangling as he tried to coordinate movement with weapons handling. Morrison shook his head in frustration. "Stop," he called, bringing the exercise to a halt.
"Lieutenant, what's the first rule of room clearing?" Cathvar's skin flushed with embarrassment. "Speed, surprise, and violence of action, Instructor Morrison." "Then, why are you moving like you're afraid of breaking something?"
"In combat, hesitation kills.
Either you're committed to the mission or you're dead."
The Zeltharian troops were struggling with concepts that went beyond mere tactics. Morrison wasn't just teaching them how to fight, he was trying to rewire their fundamental approach to conflict. Zeltharian military doctrine emphasized minimal casualties, surgical precision, and proportional response. Human military doctrine, especially special operations, emphasized achieving objectives by any means necessary. "Instructor," called out Sergeant Major Thys Lan, a grizzled veteran whose carapace bore the scars of numerous border skirmishes, "the men are having difficulty with the concept of acceptable losses."
"In Zeltharian tradition, we do not sacrifice lives unnecessarily."
Morrison paused in his demonstration of improvised explosive construction.
"Sergeant Major, let me ask you something. If one of your soldiers dies preventing the Krogar from massacring 1,000,000 civilians, is that sacrifice unnecessary?"
"Of course not, Instructor, but nothing. War isn't about preserving the lives of soldiers. War is about accomplishing the mission.
Sometimes that requires sacrifice. Sometimes it requires doing things that would be unthinkable in peacetime. The Krogar understand this. That's why they're winning."
The truth was becoming apparent as the weeks passed. The Zeltharian military, despite their advanced technology and tactical sophistication, was fundamentally unprepared for the kind of total warfare that Morrison represented. Their entire philosophy of conflict was based on civilized rules of engagement, proportional response, and minimizing collateral damage.
Morrison's philosophy was simpler: win at any cost.
"Today we're going to discuss insurgency tactics," he announced to the assembled troops. "Your mission is to operate behind enemy lines, disrupting their operations and forcing them to divert resources from their advance."
"This means you'll be fighting dirty."
A young corporal raised her hand.
"Instructor, what do you mean by fighting dirty?" Morrison's smile was grim.
"I mean using every advantage you can find, regardless of whether it's fair or honorable. Poison their water supplies.
Sabotage their equipment. Target their commanders.
Use their own tactics against them. Make them afraid to leave their fortified positions."
The room fell silent as the implications sank in. These were concepts that violated every principle of civilized warfare that the Zeltharian military had ever embraced.
"Instructor," Lieutenant Cathvar said slowly, "some of what you're describing would be considered war crimes under galactic law."
Morrison's expression hardened. "Lieutenant, when the Krogar finish conquering your empire, do you think they're going to care about galactic law? Do you think the civilians they enslave or execute are going to appreciate that you fought honorably while losing the war?" He gestured to a tactical display showing the latest intelligence reports from the front lines. 3 more systems fell while we've been training. The Krogar don't take prisoners, they don't negotiate, and they don't show mercy.
They're not bound by your rules of civilized warfare.
Why should you be? The moral struggle was visible on every face in the room.
These were soldiers who had been raised to believe that there were limits to what civilized beings would do, even in war. Morrison was asking them to abandon those limits. "Let me tell you about my species," Morrison said, his voice carrying a note of bitter experience.
"Humans have been fighting wars for our entire recorded history.
We've fought with clubs and stones, swords and shields, rifles and artillery, tanks and aircraft, nuclear weapons that could destroy our entire world.
Do you know what we learned?" He waited for their attention before continuing.
We learned that the most dangerous enemy is the one who refuses to accept defeat. The one who keeps fighting when any reasonable being would surrender. The one who is willing to do whatever it takes to protect what they value.
Morrison activated a holographic display showing Earth's history of warfare.
Images flashed by ancient battles, medieval sieges, modern conflicts, all depicting the relentless human capacity for violence in defense of their principles. We learned that there are no rules in war except winning and losing. Everything else is luxury you can afford only if you're strong enough to enforce it. The Krogar are stronger than you are using conventional warfare.
If you want to beat them, you have to become something they're not prepared for. Training intensified over the following weeks.
Morrison pushed his volunteers beyond their comfort zones, forcing them to think like predators rather than soldiers. They learned to move silently through alien environments, to sabotage equipment using improvised materials, to gather intelligence from unwilling sources, and, most importantly, to strike without warning and disappear without trace. The breakthrough came during a simulated mission against a mock Krogar installation. Morrison had constructed a replica of a typical enemy supply depot, complete with guards, defensive systems, and logistical operations. Previous attempts by Zeltharian teams to assault the position had resulted in heavy simulated casualties and mission failure. This time, Lieutenant Kethvar led a team that ignored conventional assault doctrine entirely. Instead of a direct attack, they infiltrated the facility over several days, posing as maintenance workers and gradually positioning themselves throughout the complex. When they finally struck, it wasn't a battle, it was a precisely coordinated series of simultaneous sabotage actions that crippled the entire installation without firing a shot. "Now you're thinking like humans," Morrison said with satisfaction as he reviewed the after-action report.
"You didn't try to outfight the enemy. You outthought them."
The success of the simulation led to approval for the first real operation. Intelligence had identified a major Krogar supply depot in the recently conquered Theta Corvitus system. The facility was heavily defended and considered impregnable by conventional forces, which made it perfect for Morrison's purposes. "The enemy won't expect an attack because they think it's impossible," he explained to his team as they prepared for departure.
"That's exactly the kind of thinking we're going to exploit."
Princess Lyralii herself came to see them off, her usual composed demeanor showing signs of strain. The war was going badly despite some tactical successes by conventional forces. The Krogar advance had slowed but not stopped, and time was running out. "Mr. Morrison," she said privately as his team made final preparations, "I must ask you directly, do you truly believe this mission has a chance of success?"
Morrison checked his equipment one final time before answering.
"Your Highness, I believe this mission has a chance of changing how this war is fought. Success in battle is measured by whether you achieve your objectives.
My objective isn't just to destroy that supply depot.
It's to make the Krogar afraid."
"Afraid of what?"
"Afraid of shadows. Afraid of their own supply lines. Afraid to trust their rear areas. Afraid that every peaceful world they've conquered might be harboring enemies they can't see and can't fight."
Morrison's smile was coldly professional. "Fear is a weapon, Your Highness. Used properly, it can be more effective than any bomb or bullet."
As the stealth ship carrying Morrison's team disappeared into hyperspace, Princess Lyralii found herself wondering again what kind of ally she had welcomed into her war. The humans spoke of fear and shadows, of tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare, of turning conquered worlds into traps for their occupiers. But, as reports continued to arrive of Krogar atrocities in the occupied systems, of entire populations enslaved or executed, of worlds stripped bare of resources to feed the imperial war machine, she began to understand Morrison's perspective. The Krogar had already abandoned any pretense of civilized warfare.
Perhaps it was time for their enemies to do the same.
In the depths of space, Morrison's team traveled toward their target, carrying with them weapons and tactics that the galaxy had never seen employed in interstellar warfare. They were about to introduce the Krogar Empire to concepts like guerrilla warfare, terrorism, and total war, human innovations that had been refined through millennia of conflict on Earth. The Krogar had conquered 17 civilizations by being better at conventional warfare than their enemies. They were about to discover that humans had never been particularly interested in fighting conventionally. As Elder Mordain had warned, unleashing humanity upon the galaxy would have consequences that none of them could fully predict.
The question was whether those consequences would save the Zeltharian Empire or transform it into something unrecognizable.
Morrison's team reached the edge of the Theta Corvitus system and began their infiltration. Behind them, the galaxy held its breath and waited to see what horrors humanity would unleash in the name of freedom. The war was about to change in ways that would shock both sides. The aftermath of the Theta Corvitus operation sent shockwaves through both the Krogar Empire and the galactic community.
What should have been a simple supply depot destruction had become something far more devastating.
Morrison's team hadn't just eliminated the target, they had turned it into a weapon against the Krogar themselves. Princess Lyralii stood in the War Council chamber, studying the intelligence reports with a mixture of awe and horror. The holographic displays showed the systematic collapse of Krogar operations throughout an entire sector, all triggered by what human military doctrine classified as a cascade failure event. The depot explosion wasn't accidental, General Vextor reported, his mandibles clicking with nervous energy.
Morrison's team used the Krogar's own logistics network against them.
The antimatter containment breach created a chain reaction that destroyed 17 secondary facilities across 4 star systems.
How many casualties? Princess Lyralii asked, though she dreaded the answer.
Conservative estimates suggest over 200,000 Krogar personnel eliminated, along with approximately 15% of their forward supply capacity in this sector. Admiral Zenkala's multiple eyes reflected her discomfort with the numbers. The collateral damage includes 3 conquered worlds that suffered significant infrastructure damage. Elder Mordain, ancient and wise, spoke from his position at the edge of the chamber.
And the human? What was his assessment of the operation? Morrison classified it as a limited success, General Vextor replied.
He indicated that the primary objective was accomplished but suggested improvements for future operations. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. A limited success by human standards had crippled Krogar operations across an entire sector and demonstrated capabilities that bordered on the supernatural. Your Highness, came Morrison's voice from the communication array, requesting permission to return to base for debriefing and preparation for the next phase.
The next phase? Princess Lyralii asked, activating the communication link.
Mr. Morrison, what you've accomplished already exceeds our most optimistic projections.
Your Highness, this was just the opening move.
The Krogar are going to adapt their security protocols and strengthen their defensive positions.
We need to escalate before they can adjust. Escalate how?
There was a pause before Morrison responded, and, when he did, his voice carried a note of grim determination.
We're going to take the war directly to their command structure. It's time to introduce them to the concept of decapitation strikes.
The next phase of human-influenced warfare began 3 months later, as Krogar forces throughout the sector found themselves facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered in their history of conquest. Morrison had trained dozens of Zeltharian special operations teams in human tactics, creating a network of insurgent cells that operated with ruthless efficiency. The Krogar Empire, built on principles of overwhelming force and brutal suppression, was utterly unprepared for an enemy that refused to meet them in conventional battle. Supplies disappeared from supposedly secure depots. Communication networks failed without explanation. Command posts exploded in the middle of the night, killing senior officers and disrupting operational planning. Most unsettling of all, conquered populations that had previously accepted Krogar rule with passive resignation began engaging in acts of sabotage and resistance. The human concept of guerrilla warfare, spread through underground networks, transformed occupied worlds into hostile environments where every civilian was a potential threat. They're calling it the Shadow War, Ambassador Keelenth reported to Princess Lyralii during a briefing on galactic intelligence assessments. Other species are watching our conflict with fascination and horror. Some are beginning to request human military advisors of their own. And what does Earth's government say about this development? They've established a new military organization called the Galactic Advisory Corps. Humans are being deployed to assist civilizations throughout the galaxy in developing defensive strategies against aggressive expansion. Princess Lyralii felt a chill of realization.
they're weaponizing their own military doctrine, teaching other species to fight like humans. The transformation wasn't limited to military tactics. Human influence was beginning to reshape Zeltharian society in fundamental ways. The warrior culture that Morrison represented challenged the peaceful philosophy that had defined their civilization for millennia.
In the palace gardens, Princess Lyralii walked with Elder Mordain among the crystalline trees that had been cultivated by her ancestors over countless generations. The beauty of her world remained unchanged, but everything else seemed different now. "Elder," she said, "I fear we may have changed more than our military doctrine.
Our people speak differently now. They think differently.
We invited humans to teach us how to fight, but they've taught us how to be human."
The ancient Zeltharian nodded slowly.
"Your Highness, perhaps that was inevitable.
You cannot learn to fight like humans without beginning to think like humans.
The question is whether this transformation will serve us beyond this war."
What do you mean?
The Krogar Empire is failing, Mordain explained. Their military doctrine assumed they would face civilized enemies who fought according to established conventions. They have no response to opponents who ignore those conventions entirely.
But, when this war ends, what kind of civilization will we have become?
Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the War Council. Morrison was requesting immediate audience with the princess regarding what he classified as strategic developments requiring command decision. In the council chamber, Morrison stood before a holographic display showing the entire galactic arm where the war was being fought. Red indicators marked Krogar-controlled systems, but, for the first time since the conflict began, those indicators were shrinking rather than expanding. "Your Highness," Morrison began, "I'm here to inform you that we've reached a critical decision point in this conflict. The Krogar Empire is preparing to surrender."
The announcement sent shock waves through the assembled military leaders. Admiral Zenkala was the first to recover her voice. Surrender?
But their military forces still outnumber ours significantly.
Numbers aren't everything, Admiral.
The Krogar leadership has realized that they're fighting a war they can't win using methods they don't understand. Their strategy was based on conquering civilized opponents through superior force. They have no doctrine for fighting enemies who refuse to be civilized. General Vextor studied the tactical displays with obvious confusion.
"Mr. Morrison, if they're prepared to surrender, surely this is the outcome we desired?" Morrison's expression was grim.
"That depends on what kind of peace you want, General.
The Krogar are offering to withdraw from conquered territories and establish defensive borders. They're proposing a return to the status quo ante bellum."
"That seems reasonable," Princess Lyralii said, though something in Morrison's tone suggested complications.
"Your Highness, the Krogar Empire still exists.
Their military is damaged but not destroyed. Their industrial capacity remains intact. Their fundamental philosophy of expansion through conquest hasn't changed." Morrison gestured to the display. "Accepting their surrender now means accepting that in 20 or 30 years, they'll rebuild their forces and start this process again."
The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear.
Elder Mordain was the first to speak.
"You're suggesting we continue the war until the Krogar Empire is completely destroyed?"
"I'm suggesting you consider what kind of galaxy you want to live in," Morrison replied.
"Do you want one where aggressive empires can attack their neighbors, suffer temporary setbacks, and then return to expansion? Or do you want one where such aggression carries consequences that make it unthinkable?"
Princess Lyralii felt the weight of decision pressing upon her.
"Mr. Morrison, what you're describing sounds like genocide." "No, Your Highness. I'm describing total victory. There's a difference."
Morrison's voice carried absolute conviction.
"Genocide is the elimination of a people.
Total victory is the elimination of their capacity and will to threaten others. The Krogar can continue to exist as a species, but their empire must be dismantled permanently."
The debate that followed was the most intense in Zeltharian history.
The military leadership was divided between those who favored accepting surrender and those who had been convinced by human doctrine that half measures in warfare led to future conflicts. The civilian government struggled with moral implications that their peaceful civilization had never been forced to confront. The humans have given us the tools to end this threat permanently, General Vextor argued. If we don't use them, we betray every being who has died in this war. But, at what cost to our own souls? Admiral Zenkala countered. If we become like the humans, how are we different from the Krogar? Princess Lyralii listened to the arguments with growing understanding of the choice before her. It wasn't just about military strategy or diplomatic negotiations. It was about the fundamental nature of her civilization and what they were willing to become to survive. Finally, she called for silence and spoke her decision. We will accept the Krogar's surrender, but with conditions that ensure they can never threaten galactic peace again. Their military will be disbanded, their aggressive leadership removed, their conquered worlds granted independence, and their industrial capacity restricted to defensive purposes only. And if they refuse these terms? Morrison asked. Princess Lyralii met his gaze directly. Then, we will continue this war until they no longer have the option of refusing. The Krogar Empire collapsed 3 months later. Faced with the choice between accepting terms that would end their expansion forever or continuing a war they could not win, they chose survival over conquest. The galaxy watched in amazement as one of the most powerful military empires in galactic history surrendered to a coalition led by a species that had only recently achieved interstellar travel. But, the real transformation was in the Zeltharian Empire itself. The peaceful civilization that had existed for millennia was gone, replaced by something harder, more pragmatic, more willing to use force to protect what they valued. They had learned to fight like humans, but, in doing so, they had become something new. Princess Lyralii, now hailed as a war leader rather than a diplomat, stood once again in the palace observatory, watching the stars that no longer held the threat of conquest. Ambassador Keelanth joined her, bearing reports from across the galaxy about species requesting human military advisors and the formation of defensive alliances based on human strategic doctrine. Your Highness, Keelanth said softly, do you ever regret the choice we made? Inviting the humans into our war? Lyralii considered the question carefully. I regret the necessity of it. I regret that we had to abandon so many of our principles. But, I do not regret the outcome. And, Mr. Morrison? What has become of our human warrior? He's returned to Earth, but not to retirement. The human government has established a new military academy devoted to training officers for galactic warfare. Morrison will be teaching other humans how to fight interstellar conflicts. The two Zeltharians stood in comfortable silence, watching the peaceful stars that concealed a galaxy forever changed by human influence. The age of civilized warfare was over, replaced by something more effective but far more dangerous. Not him, father, I fear that human warrior, Lyralii murmured, remembering words from an ancient Zeltharian poem about the dangers of summoning powers beyond one's control. The irony was profound. In seeking to preserve their civilization from the Krogar threat, the Zeltharian Empire had transformed itself into something the galaxy had never seen before, a peaceful species that had learned the human arts of war. The humans had kept their promise to teach the galaxy how to fight. The question now was whether the galaxy would ever be the same again. As reports continued to arrive of human military doctrine spreading throughout civilized space, Princess Lyralii understood that she had witnessed the beginning of a new age. An age where the human capacity for violence in defense of freedom would reshape the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. The warrior from Earth had returned home, but his legacy would echo through the stars for generations to come.